Welcome to the Therapeutic Food Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Marian Mitchell. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach, therapeutic diet expert, and founder of The Road to Living Whole. There are many different diets out there. It's hard to know which one is right for you with your chronic illness and autoimmune disease. In this podcast, I'm going to share with you the foundational pieces every single therapeutic diet out there shares, and also how to use the best one for your particular diagnosis. If you've been looking for a meal planning partner, help navigating the complicated healthcare system, and want to feel better quickly, I'm your girl. Grab your kombucha and notebook. Let's dive in. Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited for this week's episode. We have Jeffery Williams with us, and he is going to talk to us about the neurophysiological impact that goes beyond symptoms and is the starting link to 90% of disease. Now, I was telling him before we started, most of our journey is we don't feel good and we're trying diet and lifestyle to figure things out. And there's this huge missing component that's really come to light in the past couple of years, which is our brain and the mind-body connection. And Jeffery has 25 years of studying this, and he has so much to share with us on how the brain impacts the body and what are some options to help work through that so that we can start really feeling better. And the stuff that we're doing with diet and lifestyle has a much faster impact. So Jeffery, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Marian. I'm so glad to be here. It's such an honor and excited for this show.
Yeah, so I would like for you to introduce yourself, share your story of what got you started down this path, and then let's dive into the topic of the day.
Awesome. Well, what really began my journey is I was really fortunate to have pretty epic parents who were into some interesting psychology, but also very much into nature. And one of the big things that really sparked my change is I grew up having a home scale farm with my dad, growing all sorts of things, and everything was organic, and I just took that for granted. When I went to college, first year at university, I was, moved into the dorms and tried to eat the food that they offered me, and I could not even palate it. So I actually ended up, moving out of the dorms and just having to go my own way. And that kind of sparked this realization that most of the world had no idea how incredible nature is in and of itself, and that most people were living that sad, standard American diet lifestyle. So it sparked my interest. I'd always been athletic, but I wasn't the kind of athlete that was going to play, an NCAA sport or something. So I kind of turned my attention to, of course, nature, backpacking, hiking, but also got into yoga and Ayurveda and Chinese medicine. Just sort of after a first year in college, it was like, this is kind of boring and I'm not really feeling fulfilled by this education. So what can I learn on the side? And that sort of just began to open up my world into all the possibilities. And one of the biggest things that happened to me was, as a kid in high school and in early college, I was trying psychedelics, and psychedelics opened me to all sorts of the hidden, unseen kind of levels of reality. Long story short is my dad found some mushrooms one day, and I'd given them to my little brother, naughty me, and he said, "What's this all about? Tell me about what this is." So he was actually dropping me back off at a train station to go back to university. And in that, the train was late. So I ended up having a 5-hour conversation with him. It was pretty wild because he was pretty open. And he was he was a naturalist. He was a guy, psychologist too. So he's really interested. I got on that train that night, and what happened was, and this may have happened to others, I have had it happen maybe 4 or 5 times in my life, where I'm usually traveling, not driving, in a passenger role. And as I'm coming out of maybe a dreamy sleep, I become aware of there's something going on. And this was like a transmission. I was at a table, there was people talking to me, and the words I heard were, everything you've experienced through psychedelics is available to every human being through all of the basic human functions. And as soon as I was like, what? as soon as I realized what I was hearing, the volume went down and it was gone. So then I was like, what are the most basic human functions? So I mapped out this map that had, well, presence. Like, this is the most powerful gift any human being has, and it's also the thing that every human desires and craves the most, is just someone to be present with them. So I put that in the middle, and then I created this little Star of David-like thing, and I put move, breathe, sound, rest, nourish, hydrate. And I was like, these are the most basic things. Of course, sex is a basic thing too, but that wasn't on the map at that time. And my life began to really magnetize all of these teachers. And so out of the blue, it's like, there's a breathwork teacher, there's a voice, sound teacher, frequency, nutrition. I just started to have this whole parallel life while being in university and bringing into my world all of these incredible teachers and teachings that just lit me up. And I began instantly to apply it, because when I was reading it, it felt like more like remembering. If you probably had that experience where it's like, this isn't new, this is like, yes, of course, right? And as I was reading those things, and that really led me to start teaching right away and working with people. And then I jumped into body work, and I learned to do Wilhelm Reich's no-talk therapy, which is breath work, moving and sounding to create cathartic release of trauma and challenges that are stuck in the body. And ultimately, it has led to my entire thing. I started my business, Lifestyles of Light, in 2003 after studying pretty rigorously and applying myself. And it's led me to have all of the tools needed in many very challenging situations with clients with the most, falling through the cracks of the medical system kind of chronic disease where they've tried everything, and then leading them back to these simple basics of our human function was able to liberate them from their conditions in a way that they didn't think possible.
I love that story. I love that you discovered it so young. I think it took me a little bit longer to kind of come into that, and just, especially the mind body. Like, I don't think that really started until my 30s, and maybe even mid 30s. And I'm 39. So it's very recent to really understand. I always knew that, like, working out, and, I always did like strength training, and I loved yoga and like just that mind, just connecting it all. And dance was another form for me. And I just knew that, like, exercise was my Prozac, right? That's what I always called it. That's what I always said. And I didn't really understand how it worked. I just knew that when I did it, I felt better, right?
Of course.
And, so to discover it so young and then to study it and to be able to apply it so quickly is just really cool. So I guess my question is, how does this all work? We're talking about neurophysiology and all of that. And so it's like, okay, how does the mind body connection work in what you practice? And tell us, what is it that you study now? What is it that you teach? And how is that all connected?
Okay, those are great questions. First, I want to just kind of lay out for your audience, just make neurophysiology simple, which is, how does our brain and nervous system affect our physical body, right? So neurophysiology,
Hmm.
everything that the nervous system is doing. So first off, the brain and nervous system are governing the entire body, the physiological and anatomical function of your being. Also, the brain and nervous system are governing your thoughts, the way you think, the way you emote is all a reflection of the level of function you're in your brain. So the most important thing in our health is going to be looking always primarily at the brain and nervous system first, because human beings work, and you could say it's from above down, inside out. So we all do this, and all our systems are worked this way. The digestive system is above down, inside out. And our nervous system is that same way. So you could say the brain is above, it comes down the spinal column, from the inside, it goes out through the nerves to speak to the rest of the body, get information, and bring that information back to the brain. So what is primary is understanding that if you're in a state of dis-ease, right, then if you're having symptoms, those symptoms are just effects. They're just like signposts on the road of life saying, hey, something's up. But the symptom itself isn't the problem. The symptom itself is just the way the body communicates back to you to get your attention to say, hey, there's a deeper level of dysfunction going on. There's a cause that created that effect. And in about, I'd say over 95% of situations, that cause is the brain being stuck in a stress state, being stuck in a lateralized primitive brain level of function. So to help understand how we got to be human beings is, I like to use the metaphor of a tree. Like when a tree grows every year, it just adds a new ring to the tree and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It doesn't abandon the core. It doesn't abandon the old rings as it gets bigger, right? Because that tree would be weak and it would break down and be very vulnerable. We would be the same way if we abandoned our older levels of brain function. And so there's this level of us that has grown on top of our brainstem, and then we've added these levels of amphibian and then reptilian and then mammalian, and then we have the human level of function. So those parts of our brain are there and they're left intact so that we survive. Survival is always going to be our number one priority, no matter what. We're designed to live. We want to live. We want to live really well. These parts of our brain, one way to understand it is if you have the older parts of your brain can move bigger neurons, bigger ions faster than the newer part of our brain, the human part of the brain that can do the subtle thinking and feeling and objective thinking. All that stuff is a finer level of function. It doesn't help us survive in the same way those primitive levels do. So to understand stress, we have to understand that something in our world, something that we're perceiving through our sensory system, is giving us a signal that either we're inadequate to meet the demands of whatever that situation is, or our vitality's too low, or we feel threatened in some way. What that does is it triggers us to go to that primitive level of function and to help us survive. But when it does that, it takes the resources that are normally given to our digestive system, our immune system, our tissue repair, our cell function replication, and says, hey, if a bear's about to eat me, none of that stuff matters, right? So I'm going to take blood flow, oxygen, and glucose and send those to my limbs as I drop into my limbic system, which is a part of that primitive brain. And now I've got all that, so I can either fight this, perceived threat, I can run from it, I can freeze and play dead. That is at the core of what's causing disease, because we're only designed to be in that for 20 or 30 minutes at a time. So as a hunter-gatherer, I'm picking berries down by the river, and a bear shows up, dang, I better go to that primitive level of function. And in 20 minutes, I'm going to know whether I beat the bear or I've gotten away from the bear, and then my brain is going to pick up all the signals and go, yeah, everything's okay. Lets that innervation, which is the energy and information, go back to those systems that keep us well. But modern stress triggers the same stuff. So the bills and the boss and the traffic and the news all trigger the same response that a bear would, but there's no everything is okay signal. Those don't go away. They're persistent stressors. So the brain is stuck idling in this level of fight or flight, which means that what suffers? Your whole body, right? Because on the back burner were all those things. You need to eliminate, you need to detoxify, you need to rebuild and regenerate, and you need to have your immune system scavenge the body, right? All those things are getting minimal voltage, you could say, from the brain, because the brain's saying priority is survival. So over time, that ends up becoming why we have dis-ease. The symptoms get louder and louder because they're saying, hey, can you find out if the threat's gone? Is it gone yet? Is it gone yet? And the longer you're in that, the louder the symptoms get and the more dis-ease arises in your system.
Yeah. Thank you for defining that. I love the way that you explained it. And I think when we're thinking about it, especially if we're kind of newer to health and we're kind of the allopathic model has failed us, so we're kind of moving into this holistic model of health, right? And I feel like food and exercise and stuff is very tangible. It's something we can really do. This feels much more daunting, right? It's like, okay, I get it, but I have no idea. I can't just quit my job and go live in nature, right? And then and then I have no idea how to defend myself from a bear, type of thing, because we're so far removed from nature now, right?
Yeah.
I know the question's going to be, okay, that sounds great, but how does it work? Like, how can I get out of this state so that my body can heal so that I can feel good again, right?
Yep.
So, where does what you do come in? And is there a name for what you do?
Yeah. Well, so that's the best question you could have asked because one thing that I think there's we live in also a world that has been so conditioned to this fantasy that, there's a magic pill out there, or there's some, miracle cause, or it's the next supplement, or it's the next technological device, or whatever is going to save you. And that's just, fantastical woo-woo thinking, and I'm really into practical. So I think you're asking the right question. Stressors are not going to go away. Of course, you could get a better job, you could move to a less stressful location and live those things, but it's more a thinking about how we adapt, right? So we're just not well adapted as human beings yet to modern stress. So the work that I do, there's several systems, right? So one of them is called Alphabiotics, and that is a way, it's like when your computer, we've all done this, we've all left our computers on and not turned them off or reset them, and we've had many apps and windows and programs and all that software up, and then finally you end up with the rainbow wheel of death, and it's just like, oh no, the computer's stuck. It's like I'm sitting here waiting and waiting and waiting. Our brain is very much like that. Stress is like having all of those programs running at all the time. It doesn't ever get to let you sleep or rest. So there is a reset button on the brain, and it's on the back of the head, and it's on the main nerve ganglion of the sympathetic nervous system. So the brain is really divided into two, or the autonomic nervous system has two main systems. There's sympathetic and parasympathetic. One is like, fight, flight, freeze, go, 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 daytime, active, reacting to the world. That's sympathetic. Parasympathetic is rest, digest, growth, repair, deep rest, sleep, regeneration. And when you're in a stress state, you're stuck in the sympathetic, you're stuck in the go. And you have to have balance between the two. Otherwise, you get way behind on all the metabolic activity. So you could have the best diet in the world, you could meditate, you could do yoga. But if you're stuck in sympathetic, you're getting about 10% of what you're eating and nutrition-wise. Your absorption is way down, your digestion's down, your immune system's down. So you're not really getting the benefits of those things. Alphabiotics was born out of chiropractic. Nearly 100 years ago, there was a chiropractor named Virgil Crane. He was hired to audit all the chiropractors west of the Mississippi back in the 20s. And he took him 5 years. He identified like 700 different adjustments at that time. But to his dismay, none of those adjustments lasted longer than 90 steps from the table. So you could put a vertebra back into position, right? Which we know that structure and function are related. So better structure, better function. Yes, that makes total sense. But 90 steps later, it's right back to where it was. So what's going on? So he had a hunch that they were focusing at the wrong level, that he needed to figure out how to talk to the brain. He ended up meeting some pretty amazing people like Paramahansa Yogananda, and he was like, you're onto it. That's the mouth of God, because he knew that had to do with the occiput area, the back of the head. And that was this very profound place in esoteric traditions, in yogic traditions, in Taoist traditions, Chinese medicine. All these places were pointing to this. So he had a hunch. And it took him, at first he developed a 12-step, so 11 adjustments. And then the 12th is what we call the alignment. And the alignment process it's a unification process. So it's like hitting the reset button on your computer or turning your phone on and off, right? It's like we need a software update. What does that do? In zero point 0.4 seconds, it gives a signal to the brain. So it's a hands-on thing that you can find practitioners, and we have a directory from the Academy of people who are certified and trained properly. But this is something that, to me, fits the modern lifestyle because, like you said, it's like, oh, diet is approachable. I might be able to get to the gym. This is something that in a matter of a couple minutes, 1 or 2 or 3 times a week at first, you can reset your brain. And the point of this is to help you adapt to the stressors in your life. Not to take them away, but to get you to recognize them as not a bear. Oh, this is just part of my life. So that way your brain and body, your neurophysiology is able to stay in balance despite those signals that we now know are not bears because you're resetting regularly, which is like a software update. Starting to respond to the present moment rather than still stuck responding to the past, which blinds us to the perfection and beauty of the present moment, where we really can be vital and be alive and express ourselves fully. Instead, we're still responding to something in the past, which is causing our system to be in that vigilant state instead of actually regenerating and healing the way we already know how. Because all healing comes from within. No one on this planet will ever heal you. You will heal yourself. And anybody who's in your health, on your health team can help you get into more favorable circumstances to heal yourself. That's what your partners, like you as a coach, can do, is get someone to unlock the beauty and the intelligence and the wisdom that's already inside of them so that they can heal themselves. But when
Right.
you break an arm, right, it's like you might have someone set that arm, but the doctor doesn't heal the bone. The body does that, right? And that's how it is with all the things that we heal.
That is such a beautiful explanation of what you do. It sound like for me, I'm like, oh, that could be pretty complicated, but the way that you explain it is super doable. I have a question.
Great.
So it is somewhat a form of chiropractic care, and but it goes beyond that to help the body really reset.
Yeah, well, it veered off, and so it's not chiropractic at all because chiropractic is wonderful, don't get me wrong, but it focuses on subluxations in the spine. And what we know, because remember the body and brain work from above down, inside out. So any subluxation is the result of a tense muscle opposed by a weak one. So that's what
Right.
causes a bone to move out of place is tension. But if we think about it as a chain of command, because we work from above down, inside out, the brain sends signals through the nerves. Nerves communicate to the fascia. Fascia tell the tissues or muscles to do either contract or relax, and muscles and tissues move bones. So a chiropractor is working at the bottom level trying to move a bone, but it didn't change the top of the chain, which is sending the messages down. So what Virgil Crane figured out is that, hey, I'm going to go to the brain and say, brain, check your environment in this moment. Is there really a threat? Is there really something to be worthy of you being in this chronic tension of stress? So a stress state is always a lateralization, and it's going to lead me to the next thing that people can do at home, and that something I'm going to share with you and your audience as well. So whenever you go into a stress state, if you think about a fighter, you notice that like they have one side that they favor, right? And they're tense
Hmm.
and they're tight and they're holding their hands up to guard and they're ready to throw some punches, right? Well, the opposite side of the body, so my left hemisphere controls the right side of my body, right hemisphere controls the left side of my body. So anytime you go into stress state, your brain picks one hemisphere to dominate. It causes the opposite side of the body to have excessive tension so that you can ward off and fight off or run away from or freeze and play dead and protect yourself from the threat. So that creates those excessively tense muscles. So that side of the body will actually be shorter because
Hmm.
it's so tight along the neck and spine. So whereas, like, and I said, the chiropractic can be wonderful, but it's going to go into the body and find where those bones are out of place and try to move them back. Alphabiotics, they veered away from chiropractic because they really felt like the idea of chiropractors diagnosing disease and then prescribing drugs even, which is what in the 60s, that's what they kind of like gave up some of their principles to become doctors so they could no longer be quacks. We quickly became the quacks because we veered away. So, but we really believe in this principle that your body is the healer. And so when we send a signal to the brain, what it does is it checks. And then what our studies show is that zero point 0.4 seconds, the brain's already scanned the body, scanned the environment, realized there's no threat, and reset down to the brainstem, turned the brain back on into both hemispheres, slowed down out of beta waves into alpha, theta, and delta waves in both hemispheres. So the tense muscles that were tight relax to tone. The weak ones turn back on to tone. So now your skeletal system, your spine, comes into balance on its own. We don't even have to touch your spine, and it comes back into balance. And it lasts 3 or 4 days the very first time you get it, because your brain is like so hungry to have been back into parasympathetic access, and it goes into a super healing state where your body is able to catch up at a 12-to-1 ratio. And what I mean by that is that if you've been stressed for 12 months, a year, if you can stay balanced for a month, your body can catch up on all of the damage that your body has created by being stuck in chronic stress in just a month.
That's incredible. How can we do that at home?
So this is leads me to thinking back to the other thing. So that is like Alphabiotics is like working with the system, reset the computer, and then let the innate wisdom programs start running their show. There's another way, and there's a movement system that the guy who innovated this system in the 80s, it's called Edgu, EDGU. It's not an acronym. It means the edge of you, which is your spine, like the edge between the two halves. And he was thrown out of a car at 2 years old, I think in 1951 or something like that, landed on his back. He was crying, but he had some scrapes, but didn't seem like too bad. Dusted him off, he went on with the show, being a human being. And he lived with chronic pain through his whole childhood. He ended up in the 70s going through surgeries and trying to figure out, he'd gotten into yoga, gotten into meditation, Dzogchen, Taoism, like all these things, trying to figure out, is there a solution? There's something, this pain doesn't stop. And he ended up having 5 exploratory surgeries to figure out what was going on. They did discover that where he had that impact, his vertebra didn't really develop properly. So he had kind of like childlike vertebra in an adult body, which being pinched nerves, so his gut and everything was not operating very well. So he, in a series of, prayers and begging meditations, he'd climb up. He was still an avid outdoorsman, and he'd climb up. He was living in Lake Tahoe, California, and up into these cliffs in the desolation wilderness, and he would backpack and just meditate, like, if I don't find something, I can't bear to live anymore. And he started noticing in his sitting meditations on these cliffs on the edge that he was doing these like sprinkler-like motions. Like, have you ever seen a sprinkler on a lawn? It's like turning. So he was doing these rotational gyrating movements, and he just started doing them intuitively. And one day he woke up and he was like, something's missing. Like, this being or this part of me that's been with me my whole life is gone. And it was his pain was no longer there. And so he was also an incredible storyteller and writer. So he decided to sequence the movements that had come through him and create a story to go with it. And so by the mid-'80s, he had formed this thing called Edgu. And it's back to this idea of like what you can do at home is that because the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body and right controls left, if you cross your midline in a specific way, you're forcing cross-modal communication between those two hemispheres. So there's the corpus callosum, which is like the great divide between the two hemispheres of the brain. Mm-hmm. If I cross my midline, I'm forcing neuroactivity to connect across those hemispheres. And so when you do this practice, it's a way of getting both hemispheres to check in. Because one, remember, if you're in a stress state, one is like hypervigilant saying, we got to protect, we got to protect, we got to protect. But the other hemisphere might be like, maybe we don't, maybe things are actually okay. So as they start to share information, you're able to actually kind of reprogram from the bottom up through movement. So movement is the fastest way to sculpt your brain, period. Movement that crosses the midline is going to be the fastest way to create and sculpt a balanced brain. So this Edgu practice I've seen it liberate thousands of people from chronic back pain and that, thought they were slated for surgery, and many of them were. And when they found this, because if you can avoid going under the knife, it's probably a good idea, because anytime you do that, there's always going to be secondary and tertiary factors that come in by having invaded the body in that way, and even to do repair. So the combination of those two is where most of my focus is in my world. So I teach people this movement system that complements the alphabiotic alignment so that they can learn to create whole brain function on their own and then maintain and sustain that brain balance, which then allows their body to regenerate at an incredible rate from just about anything. I've seen the most chronic conditions liberate, you could say, or someone could remission themselves which I think leads us to our next piece that we should probably talk about, which is you keep mentioning the mind-body piece. And so, of course, this is all mind-body, and especially when you see Edgu, Edgu is this like life-affirming sequence of movements through a story that you self-reflect. What's going on in my life? So it's kind of like self-induced therapy while
Mm,
moving. So you're able to access mind and body and also multisensory. So you unify your field of awareness and your sensory field into the present moment. And so people, you get hyper present, and you can only heal in the present. It's all the real action of life. All the juice is happening now. And you could say there is no past, there is no future, there's only this moment, right?
right.
So the other thing is, and I've heard some of your other show guests talk about it a little bit, which is the trauma factor,
Hmm.
right? And I look at it as more of just developmentally what it is we experienced, and especially experienced to be void, missing, lacking, or violating. And so those four ways that we as youths experience and perceive the world, those set us up in a certain way. So whatever it is that I perceive to be missing, void, lacking, or violating, there is an equal and opposite. So meaning if I grew up in a broken home with really feeling alone, really feeling scared, that means I had a void of feeling safe, feeling connected, feeling my family. So I am naturally going to be inclined as a soul to fulfill my life by finding safety, connection, and family. Okay? And so, but there's societal conditionings from our mothers and fathers and teachers and preachers that condition us to conform to being something that we're not, right? To like, well,
Hmm.
being connected and feeling safe and having a family, that's all nice, but I got to academically achieve because that's what success is, right? So as long as we are out of alignment with who we really are, we're going to experience symptoms. We're going to experience dis-ease. And so there's this factor that actually, I would say, trumps all the other factors, which is if you aren't living honestly with the highest priority, what you value the most as a core central part of your life, how you fill your days, you're going to have a really hard time getting well. And there's all the stories, and I worked on this remission project, and there's correlation. They found that spontaneous remission, which I don't really believe is like this exactly the way it is, but 93% of people who had stage 4 cancer who got well suddenly, right?
Hmm.
93% of them were the ones who, when they got the diagnosis and the prognosis, said, screw it. I got 6 months or I got 6 weeks. I've always wanted to go live in France and paint, so I'm doing that. And when they did that, guess what? They didn't have cancer anymore. 93% of people who decided to live the life they actually wanted to live that would fulfill them and be inspiring got well. And it was like that. It was instant because it was the body was just saying, hey, stop being who you aren't. It's louder and louder and louder, and the symptoms getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the disease getting bigger and bigger. But then when they finally stepped into their own shoes and took some steps, their own natural innate capacity to heal and to be alive and to be inspired and to express themselves came into being.
I have so much going through my head right now. But the biggest one is I think of this guy who got diagnosed. He was like, yeah, months to live, decided to go live on a Greek island and lived like 30 more years. That is, yeah, I like I said, I'm thinking about like the EMDR interview and the craniosacral interview. And it's like, how do we release trauma from the body? And so much of it comes back to like the mind body connection and how do we help the body release the stuff that it's holding on to so that it's not there anymore. And I'm cannot wait to go and look this up. Is it accessible? Is this Edu accessible?
Super accessible. I'm actually going to definitely give all of your audience a gift and to access some Edu for free at the end of this. So I think it's like haveahappyspine.com. You can get this download and get a 75-minute class with me where I explain the neurophysiology, and you'll review a lot of what we just talked about, but I'll also give you the movements and how to do some of them. Because it's one, what I love about Edgu and what really got me as a yogi, I mean, I was like a yogi junkie, like doing like 8 hours a day and teaching, I was teaching 15 classes a week at a retreat center. I was really into it. And then I found Edgu and I was like, what? I feel as good as if I just did 3 hours of Kundalini yoga in 20 minutes. What the heck? And the reason I loved it so much is you don't need any special garb. It's not affiliated with any, other traditions or religions or spirituality. You can do it anywhere. I do it every time I pump gas at the gas station because it's done in a standing stance, or you can lean against the corner of the front, fender of your car and do this movement. So it's super accessible. It can be done anywhere by anyone. I've done it in old folks' homes where people could barely move and they still and there's a story. And we are beings of story. We make meaning from stories. We all are telling ourselves stories. We're all writing our own stories, whether we choose to believe it or not, we are. And that is the most profound piece of it, is this movement that crosses the midline, gets the brain to come into whole brain function, slows down the brain waves, but also gives you an opportunity to reflect on what's happening in your life. Which leads me back to what I wanted to share with you about our traumas. And it's not only trying to get the trauma out of the body, because the trauma, all of our traumas are polarized, unbalanced perceptions. And that is like a hard pill to swallow for a lot of folks, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we go through something that is traumatic or violating, we're back to the stress piece, okay? Because back to this level of brain function we talked about at the very beginning, which is the level of brain function that we're in is going to dictate how we perceive and how we think and how we feel. And so at that primitive level of function, it's binary. And so you have one pole or the other. There's upsides and downsides. And so we can see clearly the downsides, but only in our whole brain function, our human level, the prefrontal cortex, when we get blood flow, oxygen, and glucose to go to that, can we see objectively, and we can see the other sides of the situation we're only seeing the downsides of. There's equal upsides, right? I have 4 kids, and I'm still great friends with my ex. She's now my ex-wife, but we were together for a very long time and have 4 children together. One of the things in our relationship, we got into a car accident just after our 4th child. And someone's bike rack, a big old Thule bike rack, fell off their car, bounced on the highway. We're going 75 miles an hour, and it came through our windshield. And it stopped about 2 inches from her chest. She's in the passenger, I'm driving. It was one of those like slow motion where you're like, I know, don't swerve the car, I'll kill everybody. And so I just stayed on it. But like, we're all, okay, we're okay. So we pull off the highway, seemed okay, dealt with the cops and all that stuff. But as you can imagine, having something like that happen, your adrenaline goes sky high. That's that's a real good reason to go into a stress state. When a couple weeks later, when the adrenaline faded, we thought she got the flu. But then the flu that kept going and kept going. And what turns out is that a stressful incident like that can put the body into such a resource depleted state that things that all of us have in minute amounts, some of us have more maybe. She had Lyme disease and we didn't know it, but that event brought it full rear its head, like took her down. And she had multiple co-infections. She even had a fungus in her gut that kills 83% of the people that get it. We tried everyone, every specialist. We saw like 28 doctors, and I spent $80,000 trying to figure out what was going on. It was miraculously like when we finally got through, like no one's going to help us. No one even wanted to give us a test for Lyme disease because they don't believe that it's that. We finally got someone to tell us that, and some of my old mentors showed up into my life just at the right time, as Providence has it. And in doing that, they said, look, no matter what, you already know, get her brain back into balance. Second, go to the top of the digestive system, which is this nexus of the liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and stomach. They all meet in the duodenum. And whatever's going on here, we have to flush her liver because we have to realkalize her body. We got to get that everything to come into balance. So we jumped onto this train and we started doing this thing. And in 3 to 6 weeks, she was 70% better. And then it just kept getting better and better. But the key factor was that in her desperation of being bedridden for over a year while her children were growing up and she was feeling like, I don't even know what I'm going to do here. And I'm, overwhelmingly stressed myself, trying to manage businesses, see clients, help her, get the kids running around. What happened was she also realized that she had been a singer and when she was young, and she had a highly stressful childhood. She was shut down in her sophomore year, like say got caught smoking or something like that in high school, and they kicked her out of the choir, kicked her out of the theater program. So she realized in that she really wanted to be an actress and sing on stage. And so that woke up something in her that complemented the healing work we were doing. I'm getting goosebumps and tears just thinking about it because it was so intense and crazy. Lo and behold, she gets so much better, and there's an audition, and she goes out against like 100 women for this lead role and gets the lead role in South Pacific. And it lit up her, and she became herself. Like she became the vibrant, alive being that she had been suppressing her whole life since high school. Even her parents, you can't do that. It's like all these people, that's not a life that you can't make a living, all those things, the conditioning that we get to conform. And she came alive, and, it was through that too that she realized that even our relationship wasn't fulfilling her in the way it was. And we kind of graduated, as we say, out of that relationship. But it was beautiful, and she's thriving, doing that. She just got another lead role just recently, so I wanted to help bridge that gap. There's there's these pieces in us. Yes, we can move in the right ways. Yes, we can reset our brains. Yes, we can do the right diets. We can understand our body and neurophysiology better. And if you have something like that's burning inside of you that wants to come through you, freaking do it. Live it. Take the steps. Be courageous. Jump off into the unknown, because I've seen it over and over again in the toughest cases. And I'm not a doctor. I don't claim to try to treat, heal, or cure anybody. That's not what Alphabiotics is about. That's not what Edgu is about. That's not what anything I do is about. It's about empowering the already brilliant wisdom that's inside of you to come alive and give you the best freaking life in the world that's meant to be yours.
I'm so excited because this feels so tangible. And I can only think that my most recent example of living in alignment was I went through a really traumatic breakup a few years ago. And through that, I was like, I need to figure out what's inside me that I keep attracting the same type of person, just a nicer version. And it really came down to, what are my values? What are my non-negotiables? And I need to stick to that. And really doing that internal work. And it was not easy, right? Of just real self-evaluation, and then really going, I am worthy of a beautiful relationship, and, that you are worthy of vibrant health and a vibrant life, and, living in alignment with what you dream and with this vision of who you really are in your brain. And I met my husband, and literally even yesterday, I was like, this is another prayer answered. I just look at him and it's constant, I have been praying and dreaming for this my whole life. And it's when you get to this place of being able to live in alignment and get your brain there, which is the hardest part, is getting out of our own way and getting out of the cycles that we're in and into a better one, right? How beautiful it is. And so I'm so excited for the people listening that they get connected to you and what you have to offer. I'll make sure to share everything in the podcast notes so that they can connect with you, because it sounds amazing. They can connect to a practitioner if this resonates with them, which I hope it does. And then Edgu. I'm excited. I'm going to go look. I want to take a class because I mean, I tend to struggle with anxiety and worrying myself living in the past and the what if, and it really does take away from the present. So I'm really excited. So how, again, you kind of said it earlier, but how can people connect with you and, with what you do?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm kind of like on constantly moving and teaching right now. My travel schedule has been insane, but lovely because again, I'm living my mind and I love it. And so you can find vitalistproject.com, Vitalist project.com. And that's kind of where you'll see like upcoming events and retreats and trainings with me that are just kind of my stuff. But there's something, at haveahappyspine.com. I've got something there, just free gift to all the listeners. That is a workshop that will get into how stress is really affecting you and what you can do about it. So you'll get an experience in that workshop that you can start to use every day, and you'll feel phenomenally different if you start to bring this in. And the beautiful thing is it's not like a huge commitment to have to go to the gym or do an hour yoga class. You can get results in just a few minutes a day. People, like what you just said was so interesting and impactful to hear, which is like living in the past and having, that run your life in a sense. It can so easily do that. But life is so precious. Like, who knows? None of us know if we get tomorrow, right? This is like,
Right.
it's, and, I've had many people die recently that's like, whoa, I was a little shocked, And so none of us know, but hopefully that doesn't induce fear, but instead induces just a joy and like a vigor to like, wow, then I really want to get present. And kind of like back to the people who went into remission, like how can I decide now to start doing what I love? Because there's that simple, like a saying that I say is, the more you fill your life with the things you love, the more you're going to love your life. It's not like, this isn't rocket science. And what you value isn't a secret. It's obvious,
Right.
but sometimes we kind of keep it secret from everyone, but internally we know we're already prioritizing it. We just kind of have to get honest about it. So, and then if
Yeah.
everyone wants to learn about Alphabiotics, that's at alphabioticinfo.com. So it's alpha, ALPHA, biotic, BIOTIC, info.com. And that's just some info about it. And then we have our academy site's actually being rebuilt right now, but that's alphabiotics.org. And honestly, like this is a new profession, Alphabiotics. It's been being taught for about 40 years, but we're really growing it now. So most of our students are people who have tried everything else, found Alphabiotics, it worked, and now they're going, well, I got to do this because there's no one in my area, or there's no one near me. And so we're growing really fast in both the United States and Mexico. But I want to give a little warning that you have to be careful. If they're not on our website, there is a couple scandalous folks who've run off with it, don't know what they're doing, and they're using a version of the name in both Mexico and the US, and they're training people wrong. So just be careful and come check out what we're doing, and we'll lead you in the right direction. And I'd be more than happy to connect with as many folks as I can and help them find that beautiful, incredible, intelligent wisdom that's already inside of them and help them turn it on.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
You're so welcome. It's great to talk with you, Marian.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you found this episode helpful, would you do me a favor and help others find it by leaving a review, sharing a screenshot on social media, or sharing the link with a friend? By you sharing what you've learned, others are able to find this podcast and join our community. Be sure to check out my website, www.roadtolivingwhole.com, for over 160 delicious recipes, a variety of meal plans, and a blog packed full of even more healthy living tips. If you'd like to learn more about how to work with me as your coach, You can schedule a free consult through www.roadtolivingwhole.com/health-coaching/. Until next time, friend. Bye.